Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into something truly unsettling and mysterious. The disappearance of Air France Flight 447. That was back in 2009.
Yeah, it's hard to forget. You have this modern jet, an Airbus A330, flying over the Atlantic, and it just vanishes.
Exactly. For such a long time, nobody knew what happened. It really made people wonder, how could a plane like that just disappear?
It really did. And it raised some deeply troubling questions, especially back then. You think about highly skilled pilots, advanced tech.
Totally. And the idea that maybe, just maybe, something went wrong in the cockpit. That seemed almost unthinkable at first.
It definitely shook public confidence.
Yeah.
And for almost 2 years, there was very little, just bits of wreckage floating miles from anywhere.
But then the breakthrough, they found the black boxes deep down on the ocean floor.
Right, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder.
Yeah.
And what they contained was, well, it was surprising and incredibly important. It shifted the whole focus onto those final moments inside the plane.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, really. We want to walk through that sequence of events.
Yeah, unpack it. Look at the human factors, because they were huge in this. And talk about the lessons learned, lessons that are still making flying safer today.
Okay, let's set the scene. The flight's going from Rio to Paris. About 3.5 hours in, it's 1:36 a.m. They fly into the edges of a big tropical storm system.
And here's the first sort of odd detail. Other planes in the area, they changed their routes, they went around the worst of it.
But Flight 447 didn't. They stuck to their planned path.
And there was another factor, something you might not think of immediately. The outside air temperature was really high for that altitude.
Higher than usual. How did that affect things?
Well, because the plane was still heavy with fuel, that high temperature meant they couldn't climb higher.
Ah, right. Climbing higher might have gotten them above the worst clouds, maybe smoother air.
Exactly. So they couldn't get out of the wetter layer. They flew right into this thick cloud.
So things are getting a bit bumpy. Around 2:05 a.m., maybe a bit after, one co-pilot, Robert, decides to call the cabin.
Yeah, just a heads up for the flight attendants. Hey, expect some turbulence in a couple of minutes. Standard procedure.
Then about a minute later, the other co-pilot, Bonin, he talks to the flight attendant, Marilyn. Same message. Gonna get rough. Be careful.
Right. So at this point, it sounds like they're aware, they're communicating, doing the normal things. They even chatted a bit about the warm temperature outside.
And how the A330 was handling it well, better than an A340, they thought. Seems almost routine, despite the weather.
Pretty much.
Oh.
Then at 2.06.50, Bonin switches on the anti-ice system. Again, normal when you're in clouds where ice might form.
But then things started to get strange. Around 2:10 a.m., unusual smells in the cockpit, and the temperature suddenly jumped up inside.
Yeah, initially they thought maybe it's the air conditioning acting up.
But Robert figured it out, didn't he? He linked it to the severe weather they were in.
He did. And another clue? Maybe. The sound of the air rushing past the plane, the slipstream, it got louder.
What would cause that?
Could have been ice crystals starting to build up on the outside of the plane. That can change the aerodynamics, make things noisier.
Okay. And Bonin mentioned slowing down and asked about engine anti-flaming.
Yeah, engine anti-ice. Basically ensuring ice doesn't affect the engine, so they're clearly reacting to something happening.
And here's where it really starts to go wrong. The airspeed indicators. They started giving inconsistent readings, just temporarily.
Right, and the most likely cause, those pit toe tubes, the little sensors on the outside measuring airspeed, they probably got clogged with ice crystals.
Like you said, like trying to breathe through a straw that's getting blocked up.
Exactly. And this seemingly small thing, this temporary loss of reliable airspeed data, it kicked off a cascade of events.
First domino. The autopilot disconnected. Suddenly, the pilots are hand-flying the plane.
And crucially, the flight control system switched modes. It went from normal law to something called alternate law.
Okay, let's break that down. Normal law on an Airbus. That's the standard mode, right? Where the computer has lots of protections built in.
Absolutely. In normal law, the computer actively prevents the pilots from doing anything too extreme, like stalling the plane. It essentially won't let you stall. It's a huge safety feature.
Like having guardrails.
Perfect analogy. But alternate law, those guardrails are mostly gone. It's a more direct mode, fewer protections.
And the big one, in alternate law, you can stall the aircraft.
You absolutely can.
Yeah.
And the evidence suggests that Bonin, who had the controls at this moment, might not have been fully comfortable or experienced with flying in alternate law. He might not have truly grasped that the stall protection was gone.
That lack of familiarity, It becomes critical. So what happened next, according to the recorders?
Well, at 2.9.41, Bonin says they're climbing, but he's pulling back on the side stick, raising the nose, but not lowering it to maintain speed as they climb.
Which is not what you want to do.
Definitely not. Seeing this, Robert, the other co-pilot, sounds worried. At 2.10.49, he calls for the captain to come back to the cockpit.
You can really sense things escalating.
Yeah. The plane keeps climbing sharply, but Bonin keeps pulling back on his stick. Nose gets higher, speed drops lower and lower
Until
the stall warning goes off. That loud, unmistakable sound telling them the wings are losing lift.
But they didn't react to it. How is that possible?
It's one of the most baffling parts. The investigation suggests they might have fundamentally misunderstood. Maybe they thought it's an Airbus, it can't stall, because they were so used to normal law, they didn't seem to register they were in alternate law.
So the alarm's blaring, but they're confused.
Deeply confused. At one point, Robert even says something like, "I don't understand what's happening," even though the engines are clearly working fine.
And there's that other feature of the Airbus side sticks. They aren't linked, right?
Exactly. They work independently. So Robert couldn't physically feel that Bonin was still holding his stick all the way back. He didn't know Bonin was continuing the action that was keeping them stalled.
So they're not even aware they're fighting each other's inputs, in a way.
Precisely. It's a massive breakdown in crew resource management, CRM, communication, coordination, shared understanding. It all fell apart.
And the captain wasn't there for that initial critical phase.
Which definitely didn't help. When Robert did take the controls briefly, around 2.11.37, he pushed forward, but then seemed uncertain and pulled back slightly himself. The confusion was affecting everyone.
Then the captain arrives back in the cockpit. How long after the start of the crisis?
About a minute and a half.
Hmm.
The stall warning is still screaming.
Does he take command immediately?
No, he doesn't. And experts have wondered why. Maybe he didn't want to make sudden inputs, worried about making things worse. Or maybe he felt he needed a moment to figure out what was going on from behind them.
But then he says something truly chilling.
Yeah, at 2.12.1, the transcript shows the captain saying, effectively, "I don't know what to do."
Wow. From the captain.
And incredibly, throughout all this discussion, this chaos, the word stall was never mentioned. Not once.
They're arguing about whether they're climbing or descending, completely unaware of the aerodynamic stall they're in.
Total loss of situational awareness. Then, descending through about 10,000 feet, Robert tries again. Pushes his stick forward.
But Bonin.
Bonin is still pulling his stick back.
Yeah.
Dual input. They're canceling each other out.
Until Bonin says it out loud.
Right, at 2.13.40, Robert says something about climbing. And Bonin blurts out in French, "But I've had the stick fully back the whole time."
That must have been a shock.
A critical piece of information, finally spoken. The captain immediately says, no, don't climb.
Yeah.
No.
And Robert demands control.
Yes, descend then. Give me the controls, give me the controls. You hear the desperation.
But it was just too late by then.
Tragically, yes. The plane was falling, stalled, at a really steep angle, something like 40 degrees nose up, but descending fast. The stall warning kept sounding right until impact.
It's a devastating sequence, and it really hammers home these issues of human factors in aviation.
Absolutely. Things like the startle effect, that initial shock when things go wrong unexpectedly, how it can just paralyze your thinking.
Yeah, and how quickly you can lose situational awareness, just completely misunderstand what the plane is doing, what the real danger is.
And the confusion over automation. Understanding what the plane is doing, what mode it's in, what you need to do when the automation steps back. It's critical.
So the big takeaway for training seems to be preparing pilots not just for the everyday, but for these high-stress, unexpected events.
Exactly. And really drilling down on understanding the aircraft systems in all modes, including backups like alternate law, plus constant reinforcement of good communication and teamwork CRM.
Are there other famous incidents where these kinds of human factors were key?
Oh, definitely. Think about Tenerife miscommunication, confusion over clearances, or British Midland Flight 92 misdiagnosing which engine failed, United 173 running out of fuel while fixated on a landing gear problem. They all involve human factors, decision-making under pressure.
But it's not always negative, right? You mentioned the miracle on the Hudson.
Right, U.S. Airways 1549. That's a prime example of excellent CRM, quick thinking, and skill under extreme pressure, leading to an incredible outcome. It shows how vital these human elements are.
Okay, so after the crash itself, there was the huge challenge of finding the wreckage.
Enormous challenge.
Yeah.
Disappeared June 1st, 2009. First bits of floating debris weren't spotted for nearly a week.
And finding the main wreckage, the black boxes on the seabed. That took much longer.
Almost 2 years. Several search phases didn't find it. Eventually, the French investigation agency, the BEA, brought in a specialist company, Metron.
What did they do differently?
They took all the existing search data, ocean currents, last known position, everything, and used advanced analysis, Bayesian statistics actually, to create probability maps. Like, here's where it's most likely to be.
And did it work?
It did. In April 2011, they found the main wreckage field right in one of the high probability zones Metron had identified.
That's incredible. But what about the black box pingers? Weren't they supposed to make finding them easier?
They were the underwater locator beacons, ULBs. But it seems they either malfunctioned, or maybe their wreckage geometry shielded the signals, or the search equipment just didn't pick them up initially. Whatever the reason, they didn't lead searchers to the boxes early on.
So the recorders weren't recovered until May 2011.
Right. And once they had that data, the BEA could piece together the full sequence we've been talking about. The iced-up pitot tubes, the autopilot disconnect, the switch to alternate law, the cruise actions, the stall.
And based on all that, they issued a whole set of new safety recommendations.
A wide-ranging set, yeah. Covering pilot training, initial and recurrent, especially on manual handling and upset recovery, aircraft system design, like how warnings are presented, how airlines monitor their operations, search and rescue techniques, wreckage location tech, even air traffic control aspects.
Trying to learn every possible lesson.
That's the goal in aviation safety. Though we should also remember the families, 13 years waiting for the final trial. Many felt frustrated, felt justice wasn't fully served. It's important to acknowledge that human cost.
Definitely. So what's the lasting impact of Air France 447 on flying today?
It's been significant. Training programs worldwide really changed focus. Much more emphasis now on weather awareness, on clear cockpit roles, especially with two co-pilots flying. Huge focus on understanding ultimate law and practicing manual flying skills, recovering from unusual attitudes.
And it also highlighted this sort of subtler issue with automation, didn't it?
It did. This idea that while automation makes things safer most of the time, pilots might get less practice handling the really unexpected stuff, the situations where the computer says, okay, I can't handle this, it's yours.
And that can lead to confusion, not knowing what instruments to trust, what the plane is really doing.
Exactly. It's this potential subtler menace, as some called it, finding the right balance between using the automation and maintaining core piloting skills and awareness.
So wrapping this up, Air France 447 is just such a stark, sobering reminder, isn't it? How critical human factors are.
Absolutely critical.
Mhm.
It shows how a chain of events, technical issues, misunderstandings, communication breakdowns can lead to catastrophe, even with advanced planes and trained crews.
And it leaves us with a thought, maybe? As we see more automation everywhere, not just planes, but cars, medicine, finance, what parallels can we draw?
Right, that balance between relying on the tech and keeping our own fundamental human skills sharp, especially under pressure. How do we make sure technology helps us but doesn't diminish our ability to cope when things inevitably go wrong?
Something definitely worth thinking about.